Hey, everybody. Welcome to the New Frontier. This is one of your hosts, Kevin, and I'm joined with my better looking co-host, Jaron, right over here. Jaron, what are we going to be talking about in the show, man, other than your stylish hair?
Uh, I don't know of a better topic than my stylish hair, so I think that's what we'll stick to today.
The New
But
Frontier
we,
hair products. Okay, good, good.
yeah. So we are the new frontier. That's a very fitting name since our profession is currently going through some changes. It's morphing a little bit. There's some really big things going on, and it's time to explore those opportunities
Yep.
and maybe touch on maybe some other aspects of why the new frontier is something that should inspire us and give us some hope. Um, I had a friend the other day tell me why he likes Star Trek, and I've never been a huge Star Trek fan,
Oh, yeah.
but he explained it to me that every other futuristic show talks about a post-apocalyptic world that's been ravaged and just beaten down, and we've reverted to being savages again.
Yeah.
But in Star Trek, we did it. We were successful. We are now venturing into the galaxy, exploring other planets, using amazing technology, beaming each other from ship to ship. Um, we made it, and we're a great society, a great nation, a great planet. And you know what? I want to hopefully we give everyone that same hope that we can pull our profession to that new frontier, the final frontier, like they say in Star Trek. That's why that came up.
Oh, got
Um,
it. What was
but
the other line that Captain Kirk says? Isn't like the captain's log, and he kind of like goes through things. So we'll use the New Frontier as our captain's log as our voyage.
yeah, there you go. I dig that. We'll do the captain's log and maybe beam each other around from town to town. Go to DC or something like that. So
And that'll be a fun thing. I mean, I think that for the folks that don't know, Jaron and I, we're pretty lighthearted guys and just really excited to have a good time. And so we'd like to be able to go to a few different locations. I know at least we'll be going to ASCP and recording live at the event there. And I couldn't think of any better partner, Jaron. A little history with Jaron and I. We've been doing some things in the space, for a while. We had our own show that was really focused on similar things, and Jaron has started different coalitions, and one that's still very active with ASCP. But when we were talking to the team at ASCP and we were thinking about some of the things we want to talk about, with you guys, is it wasn't a better fit than ASCP. The American Society of Consultant Pharmacists is a really good partnership for Jaron and I think this message inside of pharmacy, and I'm very thankful for their partnership with this one, even though Jaron does poke fun at Chad every once in a while, and I do too.
it's all in good fun.
It is. It is. So the show, Jaron, I guess in general, so that folks know that are listening, what's kind of our backgrounds? Let's give them a little bit of background for you and I on the particular topics that we are going to be focusing on, which are reimbursement for cognitive or clinical services, really any consulting kind of space. And then also the new technology coming out that's really morphing the profession, or things we should know about it, before it becomes paramount for our careers.
Absolutely. I began my career as a consultant doing MRRs, monthly regimen reviews, MMRs, or monthly medication reviews.
Yeah.
And that was the crux of which I built everything. That's the foundation that I've started to branch off of. From there, I looked at incident 2 visits and started to find out how to implement that into the practice. I looked at chronic care management, or CCMs. I looked at annual wellness visits, or AWVs. And my big thing right now is finding out how to utilize BHI, or behavioral health integration services, in nursing facilities, because
Huge.
there's a massive need for that. And the small amount that I've done so far has been getting rave reviews, and there's a lot of I got a lot of potential growth to branch from that on the horizon here in the near future. So it's an exciting time with lots of opportunities for us to take advantage of.
Yeah.
And as far as tech goes, I think for years we were stuck on our expertise, or if you're at Omnicare, they use Oscar. Right now, there's a few of them out there that are more cloud-based and far more efficient. They don't have the bells and whistles that our expertise used to have, but they're coming along. The one I use is called Opal Care. There is another one made by Pharmacare in New Jersey. I can't remember what it's called, HG Plus or something like that. And it's amazing. It helps you do a lot of different stuff. There's another one called DocStation that also helps you submit claims for services. But right now, as far as BHI goes, I basically have built this really amped up, beefed up spreadsheet that helps me generate a lot of stuff. And I'm hoping to build more softwares to help out with those types of services. So that's kind of where I'm at. What about you?
You know, Bud, so background on the reimbursement side, so really started out in a similar space, you know, working on long-term care chart review and leveraging that really on a contract basis for individual charts, just like many folks do, and moved from that to some hourly billing that came in the consulting form for mental health, you know, billing and holistic healthcare kind of components. Went into the hospital system and really stopped looking at pharmacy billing in the hospitals often. It was just really mandated that I was there, that a team was reviewing orders, but the billing on that side was, how much is an order worth? How much is a review worth? You know, when I was in telepharmacy sales and really trying to delve into what's the value of reviewing an individual order for a facility and having that match with the pharmacist's individual salary and making it scalable, you know, so taking that exact same kind of grain of thought, pulling that into some of the work that I've done with software companies over the years and some other clinical companies that are looking at similar things that Jaron and I have had lots of conversations that our roads have passed each other because we've been in those same spaces in the remote care, you know, kind of world. And so CCM, TCM, RPM, RTM, et cetera, all the other alphabet soup that right now, if you're listening to Jaron and I, you might be like, oh man, this is too much. It's going to get too technical. Really simple, really straightforward and quite easy. I mean, even the billing mechanisms are pretty easy and pretty straightforward. They're just something we have to get used to, you know, in general, if we want to be able to enter this space. And for the most part, I don't think that it's, if we want to enter the space, we're going to have to, right? We're going to have to start doing things in this clinical world with documentation, et cetera. And so there's a lot of my reimbursement kind of past and path, and also done some PMPM, so per member per month, you know, from the insurance kind of world. And so Jaron and I will bring in lots of folks, and Jaron mentioned, you know, some of the the companies that he's kind of worked with over the years. We'll bring in some of those leaders and some of their competitors to kind of talk about pros and cons of what's kind of going on in the industry and get some different perspectives in the reimbursement world. And then on the tech side, you know, for me, it's really been everything from working in bedside medication verification. You know, some of the facilities I started and cut my teeth inside of, they didn't have it, you know, so they were trying to say, do we need it? You know, what's the benefits of it? And for a lot of you listening today, you're probably thinking, how in the world could we practice medicine without it? You know, without the ability to scan something and make sure that we're accurately delivering medications to patients. And we're doing that everywhere, you know, and I think that that's a real testament to, we can add in new technology and make it part of our workflow quite seamlessly and benefit from it one way, shape, or form. I've worked in the clinical decision support space, you know, with a few different vendors and bringing them in the hospital systems, worked with several EHRs. In fact, one of the companies I was part of, I think we had 12 electronic health records that were used by critical access hospitals throughout kind of the Northwest. Have worked in software development and product development for outpatient systems and for RPM and RTM systems, and have integrated a bunch of other like wearable technology and biometrics into systems. So some decent exposure there. One that I probably am the most passionate about, that Jaron and I will have several guests kind of on the topic, because I'm sure for you probably have heard these two letters every once in a while, A and I, put together for some reason. I'm not sure why. But augmented intelligence is the way I like to phrase it, I guess, Jaron. And I know lots of organizations have liked to go with augmented as opposed to artificial, because it's really an enhancing capability is the way we should look at it. Sorry. But I think it's an enhancing kind of aspect, you know, that we can find a way for you and I to bring those folks in and tell us, what's the future of that space and how do pharmacists get involved in it? And where is the technology already hitting pharmacists' desks that we might not know about? So those are some of the things we've kind of done previously. We already talked about ways that you kind of spread the word. So you want to do a history lesson together, buddy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally joking. I'm like super excited about artificial intelligence. And there's so much about that that's exciting yet also terrifying. But once again, we hope on this show to make everyone more hopeful and not so scared of the future. There's a lot to be proud of, a lot to be excited about, and as far as our history goes, I think we have a long history of underselling ourselves, and that needs to change. Especially where I work historically as a consultant pharmacist, we had a tendency to just not charge very much for the service. As a result, nursing homes, we didn't put much effort into it. And, we could have a long, fruitful conversation about this. This is just my perspective from what I have experienced. As a result, the nursing homes stopped expecting very much from us. As a result, it was hard for us to make reasonable marginal profit off of performing this service. And it's time to really show that we are capable of doing useful clinical services, making an impact, improving outcomes, and charging what we're worth. Insurance companies still don't know what to pay us for services because we've just historically not done a good job at showing our value and proving our value. Well, we've proven it. We've just never been good at saying, here's what I'm worth, pay me this. And that's something I hope we're able to change. And
beautifully said.
These opportunities are out there, and we need to take advantage of it. Say what?
No, I think that's beautifully said. I think we're going to bring on lots of guests that, they're doing that, Jaron. They're doing the proving, kind of component of showing this is what I've built. This is why it works. Here's the ROI, the return on investment that everybody wants to be able to see. And I think it really speaks volumes that pharmacists are looking at that. And, as you kind of jokingly remarked about the changes in technology, what's interesting to me is, there's new technology coming our way that's in the form of digital therapeutics or something called PDERs, which we'll talk about later. That's really a complementary component to, you got a prescription drug and a software that comes with it. And several other aspects of medicine, wearables, software as a medical device, all of those pieces that now is coming to the pharmacy fray. And we haven't always been great about adopting new technology and owning it or even steering it. And I think that's the biggest call for me is some of the experts that need to be in the room are all of our listeners that are pharmacists. There's a ton of knowledge that they can spread inside of there, but it hasn't all been roses for us, Jaron. So we'll talk a little bit about a few articles we pulled up for the audience to look at here. And the first one I wanted to mention was one that you actually pulled up here, this 2021 EAB article, and some of the statistics that they kind of broke down. Would you like to go into that, bud?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good information in there. I think when you start looking at where we have been and where we're headed, it's we still have jobs growing out there. The problem is the types of jobs available are changing, and between 2019. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I'll read some of these statistics to you, and then you can kind of comment on like what your thoughts were during that time. I mean, kind of recollecting what went on during that time. So a few of the stats that I have here up on my screen are, so the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, and mind you, this was a 2021 article, so we're looking and reflecting back a little ways, but the Bureau of Labor and Statistics projects a 3% decline in employment for pharmacists between 2019 and 2029. Resulting in a loss of approximately 10,000, 11,000 jobs. And so during that time, I'm sure you're recalling too, Jaron, I remember CVS was going to close down a huge bunch of stores. Walgreens was going to close down a bunch of stores. Rite Aid, brink of bankruptcy, even back then, and wasn't sure what was going to go on kind of moving in the future. So it was quite tumultuous. And then there's always kind of the threat of automation, coming forward to be able to help with that, additional fill load. So that particular audience, which, we've looked at the statistics before, and it's well over 50% of all pharmacists are employed in that world. We're quite worried, what's going to happen next. Your thoughts on that first key statistic there, Jaron, or kind of reflecting back on what you remember?
Yeah. I think one of the most telling problems with this is that those jobs, I think another statistic was that 2,500 closed last year alone, which doesn't sound like a lot. But when you really look at it, that's about 50 per state. And those are jobs that we have historically had. And because of the fact that there seems to be a shift in what is needed from us, there are fewer retail jobs that are needed now. So now we need to shift our focus more into the service side, diversify what we do as pharmacists, and especially when you consider the fact that it talks about how student debt has increased significantly over the years, $40,000 in the last 5 years alone. And I remember when I graduated pharmacy school in 2011, I remember thinking, wow, this is a lot of debt. And if, this is borderline, if it was much more, any amount more, it might not be worth it anymore. And now here we are 13 years, 14 years later, and it's increased significantly since then. And that explains why we're getting a lot of stagnation in applicants for pharmacy school. And also looking at the decline in jobs, like you said, in the typical setting, we need to let people know that even though those jobs are declining, there are other opportunities that are increasing significantly.
Well said. Yeah, I think that the one really interesting thing is kind of moving forward then. We thought there weren't going to be as many jobs. We saw that there was a massive uptick in the number of universities. We went from 91 in 2008 to 136 in 2018. We've already seen this year at least one close right down. There is some market correction, and a lot of the others are reducing their student sizes, right? Their student body sizes and their graduating class sizes. So there's some market correction going on there. But the other piece that hasn't corrected, at least in my mind, is there's a USA Today article that you and I both looked at, and it was going over jobs in particular that had kind of the most stagnant salaries, and they listed it as a very kind of pleasant term of occupations with the most modest pay increases. And I'm like, you mean like people that aren't keeping up with the times? Okay, got it. And that's us. We've lost negative 16.4% is where we're at for our salary change. And that just doesn't result in something that's very good for anybody. And in fact, there's another article that was from Drug Topics, also a 2024 article, and all kind of coming to an interesting head and kind of following the pandemic, because you saw that before the pandemic, it was like 40 to 50% of pharmacists were thinking of burnout. Like they're like, this is getting to be a bit much. Prescription volumes, a overall appreciation of job, what they were doing overall. And then after the pandemic, we're looking at 9 in 10, pharmacists that are in that category. So it was a resounding call for kind of help, from the profession of going, we got to make some pretty significant changes. And interestingly, there are a number like 36% were saying like, I'm going to go look for a different job. I can't do this any longer inside that same article. But here's that ray of hope that I think is really interesting for us that, we're going to talk about the new frontier kind of moving forward, basically forgetting all of the past to a certain degree, respecting what has happened and seeing kind of how can we do things better moving forward. But in that same article in Drug Topics, the Occupational Outlook Handbook, they estimate 13,400 job openings for pharmacists every year, right? And so there's a demand, like there is a significant demand. And I think as long as we don't market overcorrect again and are able to stay a little bit more streamlined when it comes to the number of students graduating, the skill sets that need to be modified, keeping up with technology, I think there's a lot of bright, potential there, even for something that like salary that we would like to see keep up and push forward inside of the medical community more than it has. Thoughts, Jaron? Any of those pieces from the past, or we jumping forward into Lightspeed?
Yeah, and that one that showed our stagnant salaries was pretty telling because it only had like 5 professions on it. The top one that grew the most, which was airline pilots, surprisingly. And the weird thing is, in the article, like the headline of it, it talked about how dentists rose the smallest amount. But then it listed us as like the worst one. So I think the dentist increase was there, but just modest, whereas ours was just a pretty prominent decline. And like I said earlier, the 13,400 job openings every year is pretty telling, and it shows you that, like we talked about earlier, that there were some jobs that have been declining, but we have a lot of jobs on the rise.
Yeah.
Ironically, I've had a few students on rotation, and every time they tell me that one of the things they want to do is managed care, and I feel like that is a growing area right now for some reason. But there are tons of different things that we are capable of doing. There are tons of new opportunities for us to take advantage of. And it's time for us to start changing that paradigm. I think more pharmacy schools need to start enhancing or maybe changing their mindset and how they're training these future pharmacists. One of the things that I find problematic is the steep decline one of these articles talked about in the reduction of actual applicants for pharmacy school. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but I remember having a student on rotation with me who actually applied for medical school. And when she went in for her interview, they said, we're not sure if you're going to make it in, but if you want to get in right now, here, go to our pharmacy school and we'll take you right now. So in efforts to make up for the fact that applicants have been declining dramatically, they're trying to funnel people in from other programs, which is unfortunate, but I get it. They had to find a way to fill these seats, and we do need pharmacists. We do have that need out there. But I think what we need to do is change and start showing people that the new type of pharmacist is different from the old, and put some excitement around that. Pharmacy schools need to teach us more collaborative practice models, and how to work in a physician's office, how to do that kind of stuff, and also managing formularies, a lot more clinical work than, and ironically, we've gotten great clinical training, but the mindset has always been strictly product centric. And I want to see us diversify so that we're already in a broad range of settings, but we need to change it so that our focus is not, almost exclusively on products. It's time to change that paradigm and get people to think outside of that box specifically.
Yeah, I completely agree, and lots of salient points in there, buddy. I think that the kind of the quality component came into question for a little while there when it came to students that were coming out of universities and things. And, I think the one thing that you and I have always been when it comes to students is just as welcoming as possible, welcoming them into the profession, wanting them to do their best. And I think that, any kind of negativity toward some desperate times, maybe for some admission crews, those are still individuals and colleagues that we need, desperately to be part of the group, and they can grow just as well as anybody else can. I think that's what I'm hoping this show can do for growth, is really showing that all of us need to grow, right? There's been some pretty massive changes that have happened and some new things that are coming along the lines that we weren't trained in, just to be frank, like it wasn't part of the curriculum, so to speak. And I don't think that, we have to put all the burden necessarily on pharmacy schools, because some things have changed rather quickly without anticipation, or those things have changed without regulatory boards making sure that pharmacy schools are keeping up with the time, so to speak. And so I think with that, what are some of the things that we feel like, Jaron, that we're going to talk about here, we're going to incorporate in conversation to help all of us keep up with these times in reimbursement and technology?
Let me see here. Sorry. So in order to fix the stagnation, is that what the question was?
No worries. So I was really looking at Jaron on here. We were at the point now we're talking about what conversations are we going to have? What
Right.
conversations are we going to bring up to be able to help everybody grow, collectively? Not just the pharmacy student world, but the ones that have been practicing for decade plus, folks that have been practicing for decades. And I think one of the conversations that we know we're going to talk about in kind of the reimbursement space is really jumping into those details. We're going to make it as fun as possible. I promise we'll bring in some pretty engaging folks in the legal and regulatory space. Please don't allow your eyes to glaze over when I say those two words, but very important for us to understand, like, what are the legal and regulatory ramifications of us doing new things, and how do we enter into those spaces? That's one topic that I know that you and I are going to jump into with several guests and several episodes over this year. Another one I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about is kind of what are pharmacists mandated to be in? Like, what are we supposed to be in, and what are the new things that we're starting to enter into?
And that reminds me what I wanted to say. So there right now, boards of pharmacy are really just regulating dispensing pharmacies, and a little bit of regulation over clinical services, a little bit of regulation over how a consultant pharmacist should operate in a nursing home. They recognize that stuff. But as far as doing CCMs, doing work in a physician's practice, doing work in a clinic in general, boards of pharmacy don't know how to regulate that. In fact, 90% of my current services that I'm offering aren't even recognized or regulated by a board of pharmacy. And so I think that we're ahead of the curve, obviously. So eventually those boards of pharmacy or regulatory bodies will catch up to it. But for now, like, if I want to hire somebody to do CCMs in Oregon, I could have them do it without a pharmacist license in Oregon. As long as we're employed by the medical team to do that, that's the only component that's required. And the medical team can hire whoever they want. So to answer your question, we want to give people hope on how these services all fit together. We want to show these old timers how we can now change that paradigm, and I say old timer with jest because I got a lot of gray hair, that's coming in here. But once again, my main component is have hope. And honestly, you see 9 out of 10 pharmacists that are burned out. Like, we're begging for this type of opportunity. Like, we're clamoring for it. It's what we need. It's going to give us a fresh new outlook. It's going to help us rejuvenate the profession and take it to the heights that it's wanted to go for a solid 2 decades. And these opportunities are out there, and they're growing, as you can see from what these articles have said.
Totally agree, and I look forward to bringing a lot of those guests on that are working on a lot of those kind of projects you were just talking about, kind of paving these new inroads. And instead of us having to reinvent the wheel, we've got a lot of information that we can be able to pass off to all of our viewers and help them understand these next steps in healthcare. So that'll be great. The other one that I think is the outer space one, to fit with our Star Trek kind of theme, is really the technology coming our way. When we talk about the augmented intelligence and looking at other things like drug databases and clinical decision support tools, and we mentioned the digital therapeutic previously. There's a lot of things that are going to start hitting desks that I often laugh with colleagues is these are all great concepts and ideas, and I know they're being talked about at a policy level and they're being developed by startups, but how are we going to create workflows and reimbursement mechanisms for those to enter practice, right? Those are conversations that we need to start jumping on, and then getting with some of the leaders in the space to be able to navigate these next few years, when it comes to that. And speaking of that, I mean, that's one of the last things I want to talk about is just really, who's the show for, Jaron? Like, who's going to watch this show? I mean, hopefully somebody, maybe my mom, she'll watch it, for sure. But other people to watch the show, the obvious, right? We're part of ASCP. So pharmacists, pharmacy students, pharmacy technicians, really obvious connection. All the folks that want to know what's happening in the pharmacy world with reimbursement and technology that are other healthcare providers, our MD, DO, RN, et cetera, colleagues, would be great to be able to partner more often and find new ways to collaborate. And I hope that we can give some information that will showcase this could be a way that we're going to do it and how. And one of the ways we'll do that is by bringing on guests that are non-pharmacists, bringing on guests that are working in these other spaces so we can start kind of cross-pollinating this information. And the last one is one that I know that Jaron and I are both really passionate about is we also need to educate not just non-pharmacist clinicians, but non-pharmacist administration and executives and business leaders that are thinking differently now about pharmacy, trying to think about all the years of going, pharmacy's a cost center, too many FTEs is problematic with pharmacies, is going, these guys really drive revenue. They really help with quality metrics. They help with X, Y, and Z things in the technology stack that we have inside the facility. I think there's lots of benefit for us to be able to create a show that can help to show all of those folks, all the incredible things happening in both reimbursement and technology pharmacy. Any other thoughts, buddy, before we beam up?
Yeah, I like the fact that you said we wanted to have more people on the show that are not pharmacists. And I was thinking about this earlier today. I would love it if we could do something like what if we were to bring on Thea Blystone or Delon Canterbury or Jenna Quinn. What I would love to have happen is they come on with one of the physician groups that they are currently collaborating with to show like how we've integrated pharmacists into their practices, how those systems work, how effective they've been, and how beneficial they've been. Because, like all the guests we've talked about so far, we're kind of in their own silos, but in order to show how beneficial it is, I think if we bring on the people who are working together as a different interdisciplinary team, that might also give a hopeful perspective and give really valuable insight on how these types of practices work.
There's nothing like seeing how the bread's made, right? I mean, just being able to see how folks are interweaving and working and making things possible in some of these collaborative efforts, I think is paramount. And the other piece that I think is great is really showcasing, the ability of a pharmacist to connect with another colleague that isn't another pharmacist and have very meaningful, fruitful relationships with them long term. That's something that also wasn't necessarily taught to you on how to cultivate, how to sell all of these pieces and network. They're buzzwords, what really means how do you develop trust and relationships that are meaningful enough for people to trust you with their patients, right? And trust you with a book of business, so to speak. And I think that'll be a really fun piece. Well, Jaron, I think for the audience, I'm really excited for you guys to be able to join along with us, ask us lots of questions along the way. Make sure that you're asking for guests and folks that you'd like to see on the show for Jaron and I. And we look forward to getting together and having lots of wonderful people on here and showcasing kind of the future of pharmacy, which we think is a bright new frontier.
Yeah. And, more than anything, let's start working together as a profession in a profession that has historically not worked well together and has maybe opposed each other at some points. It's time for us to unify, to synergize our efforts. Instead of having 7 organizations going 7 completely different ways, we can accomplish great things in this profession if we all unify and come together. And I even had an opportunity this week. I was speaking with a potential competitor. And I gave her insight and said, look, if this comes down to me helping you build something similar to what I'm doing so that you can be successful, that's good for our profession, because what I'm working on is good for our profession. And if it means me helping you do it without me down the road, but you pay me to help you get it up and running, so be it. But I don't want to turn this into a dog eat dog. And I want everyone to be successful as a pharmacist doing these collaborative services. It's time for us to do great things.
Awesome. Well, I love it. Well, thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful night, and we will see you next time on The New Frontier.